Hi all. What I want to do today is just give you some quick guidance on assignment 2 for ITC568. So let's have a look at it. It's worth 25%. It's an essay due the 16th of August, approximately 3,000 to 4,000 words. There is some reading for it. There is a Cloud Security Alliance document that I strongly suggest you should read on cloud security complexity. The link is there. I would also suggest that the new guidance that the ACSC put out today on cloud security may also be of some interest to you in this assignment. Okay, so the scenario for this assignment is a government one, right? A Department of Administrative Services. Those of you who know Jim Hacker will probably recognise the name, and they are moving to a shared services model. So this means that the DAS will start to centralise services for the whole of government, and some of those services will be HR and personnel management, payroll, so forth. The result of that is that each department or agency that runs a HR or personal management, payroll service, etc., will be required to migrate all its data to DAS so it can be consolidated there, and then DAS will then provide those consolidated services to all the agencies and departments within the government. Another government mandate that comes into play here is this cloud first approach, which means if a department is looking to update or acquire software and services, they are required to look at the cloud first as part of their approach to this. So following these somewhat strategic policy changes from the government, DAS has decided to do the following. They're going to purchase a HR and personnel management solution from a US-based company. Now this is a software as a solution approach. Now this gives DAS a complete HR suite. So they've got performance management, payroll, all that sort of stuff comes into it. The provider has advised that the database is stored in a cloud data center based in California, and there is a replica database located in a cloud data center in Dublin in Ireland. However, all the data processing, configuration, maintenance, updates, feature releases, etc. are pushed out from the provider's processing center in Bangalore in India. Now, normally what will happen is that employee data will be uploaded from DAS daily at midday, Australian Eastern Standard Time, and that will go initially to Bangalore for processing before being loaded up into the main provided database in California. So there is the scenario. I suggest I've given you a somewhat briefer version of it here. Read it carefully. Okay, so the tasks that you've got to look at. You've got to do a risk assessment. So what you're looking at here is writing a report that assesses the risk to DAS in the following areas. First bit, consider the data and information that DAS holds on employees in the current HR system. Now you've got to do three things. Firstly, what are the existing threats and risks to the security of that data that is contained in the in-house HR database? Notice that the database currently exists is in-house, an on-premise database. You've then got to consider, are there any other risks or threats to the employee data after it migrates to an SaaS application? And then finally, look at the resulting severity of risk and threat to the employee data. So you'll see most of your emphasis here is going to be on existing threats, then looking at any other threats once you move to SaaS, and then severity of risk. Second question is much the same as the first, except now you're looking at privacy as opposed to security. So what are the existing threats and risks to the privacy of that data in the in-house database? Again, the second part of the question is, how is that affected? Are there any additional risks and threats to privacy after migration into an SaaS database? And finally, let's look at the severity and risk to privacy overall. The final question then is to determine what are the threats and risks to the digital identities of the government employees once you move to a software as a service application. So you've got three different aspects you're looking at. Security of data, privacy of data, and threats and risks to digital identity. They're the three questions, okay? So basically, you've got to come up with a report that covers it in three different areas. Firstly, a first heading would be security of employee data, a second heading, privacy of employee data, and a third heading, digital identity issues, or something to that effect. So what's your approach here? Well, you don't have to do a full-blown risk assessment. You know, you are looking at a somewhat abbreviated version. So for question one possible approach would be, you know, consider a HR database that you know, perhaps in your own organisation, and consider the risks to it if it exists as an on-premise database. Now, a lot of us are in this situation. We have, you know, on-premise databases, or if you've migrated off already to one in the cloud on a software as a service app, perhaps you had an on-premise one prior to your move, so you'd still be able to look at that. Having done that, now look at that risk assessment and see what it looks like now that you've got the database online in a software as a service environment. You know, so what's the changes here? And realistically, it's those changes that come into play. Excuse me. Then you can assess severity and risk as a result of that. Now, you'll find that CSA report on cloud security complexity quite helpful here, and so will that new ACSC cloud security guidance. So they are two things you probably really need to have a good look at. You'd use a very similar approach to question 2, but now you're looking at risks and threats to privacy as opposed to the security of the data. And then finally, you look at digital IDs and how that works. So some hints. Make sure you carefully read all the case study information. There are bits there that need to be quite carefully considered in view of the risk, but that's all the hint I'm going to give you on that one. Make sure you read the marking criteria to see what we'll be looking for in each question, and that'll also give you some ideas about approach for each part of a question. If you need, in questions 1C and 2C, where you're looking at assessing the severity, if you want to use a tabulated approach to do that, yeah, that's fine. I mean, if you want to go tabulated in the other questions as well and work on it, I don't have any major objections to it, but just make sure it's quite clear what you're doing. Also, we don't expect you to find every possible risk and threat, but you do need to find the major ones, and they are fairly obvious, I've got to admit. Please don't get hung up on word counts, because I'm not, but I am quite hung up on seeing logical thinking and expression, right? I really wanted to see that you've thought this thing through, not that you've just considered, how many words that you're putting together. Don't forget your references. You might try practicing the cite as you write option in your reference manager before you get too involved in the assignment, because once you get used to the idea of cite as you write, it makes your life in referencing just so much easier. So finally, this is a really good example of a real-world problem. This idea of shared services has been the aim and the bane of many governments and private industry firms over the years, and it's quite often seen some fairly spectacular failures. There has been a couple of successes, but the number of failures outweigh them dramatically. From our viewpoint, though, in this subject, this puts you straight into a problem that has considerable issues around privacy and security that you've got to consider, particularly when moving into a cloud ecosystem. It starts you thinking about these issues and how you need to approach them. This is an interesting assignment, and I think you'll find once you start to get into it that it'll start to really get you thinking about how this is going to work and how it would work if you had to do it, right? Good luck and enjoy.